here. Should we close the door? Or do you like to have it open? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I'm hoping that we can have some time to both listen and then at the end have lots of conversation. So my name is Anita Walls. I'm from Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is a polytechnic university that's about 5 hours south of here. And I used to live in Washington, D.C. about 10 years ago. I don't know most of your contexts, if you're from America and if you're from somewhere else, but I would love to learn more about why you're here and what you want to learn in just a minute. First, I want to say Happy Open Education Week. It is our spring break at Virginia Tech, which is why I can be here today. But it's Open Education Week around the world. So if you are a Twitter user or hashtag finder, this link will get you to a lot of events. Yesterday I saw a curated 24-hour long list of live web events. So if you want to know more about this topic, there are presentations from around the world that are going on this week, all week. So happy Open Education Week. As Olivia mentioned, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a subject liaison. I'm a librarian in the university libraries. I work with the faculty, students, and staff of economics, math, and then legal studies. We do not have a law school, but we have people around the university that teach and do research on legal topics. I also work primarily in the area of open education, and then also copyright and some open access types of work. I want to show you a little bit about what we're doing to support open education at Virginia Tech. We can come back to this, but I wanted to show you up front some of the ways that we are trying to support / instigate open educational practices at VT. Some include one-on-one consultations as needed, teach a lot of workshops. We run a number of listservs for our faculty, also on the state level. Most of my time goes to providing technical support and grants for faculty who are building or adapting open educational resources and then planning learning opportunities. So that I do not forget to tell you, there is a handout on the table over there that you may want to pick up or take a picture of. You are invited to our Open Education Symposium. It's in about a week and a half on the 19th, a Monday. The 3 events on Monday are live streamed, so you do not have to drive 5 hours to come and see us, but they're very much on the topics that we're going to talk about today. So please take a moment before you go to take a copy of this. They're free. We'd love to have you there. So, good morning. And then 2 other things that I also do are, I've developed a teaching inquiry group for faculty and grad students at Virginia Tech who want to learn more. They want to discuss what is their experience, what does open education mean in their context, what are they trying to do, and people come with very different ideas, as you will probably see. So Virginia Tech is a land-grant institution. We have about 34,000 full-time equivalent students, grads and undergrads. The library is fairly traditional in terms of our services, but we have a lot of focus on making things. We're in part a large engineering school. We also have emphasis on business and a wide range, of course, of humanities-related topics. But you can see some of our common areas where students study and do group work together. I would love to know how many of you are from American here. Okay. And how many of you are from how many of you are from maybe outside of higher education? Maybe you work with a different group, age group than college age or graduate students. Anyone? Okay, a few. Great. How many of you are here because you know a lot about OER and you want to know more? Okay, how many of you would say OER, what's that? Don't be shy, it's okay, it helps me, thank you. How many of you have heard or could maybe describe what might be meant by open pedagogy? Okay, all right. Let's see, what else can I ask you that would be helpful? I think that's a good start. Did you have something? You looked like you wanted to say something. So our question today really is, what on earth? What is open education? I'll let you read this definition or description. This description comes from the organization that organizes Open Education Week, and what I like to emphasize from it is that it's not one thing. It has a really strong emphasis on sharing for the purpose of learning. It has a strong emphasis on both resources, so maybe open educational resources, maybe other things, maybe tools, so technologies, practices. This is a really wide, very broad sort of definition, but it's purposeful in that it focuses educational access and effectiveness, and the scope is worldwide. Depending on what context you're in, as I'm in a university context, we cannot serve the whole world. We primarily serve our students, but we hope that our impact goes worldwide. So open education can mean things in some different contexts depending on where you are. Okay, so open is about sharing. So knowledge sharing, tools, technology, collaboration to a certain degree, that will become apparent, and these things in the service of learning. So I'd like to tell you about two practices that are pretty prominent in the open education field. Open educational resources and open pedagogy. And then as a way of talking about the philosophy of open education, I want to tell you about a value framework. So does this sound like a good place to go? Okay, so this is sort of our outline. Open educational resources. I'll let you take a minute and read this definition also. Okay, so these resources could be almost anything. They could be books, they can be modules, they can be videos, they can be assessment tools. But what is very important about them is that they are in the public domain, meaning they are free of copyright. They've either graduated from copyright, they were donated to the public domain, they were created by a certain government agency, and when that agency creates things, they are automatically in the public domain. Or they're released under an intellectual property license. And that kind of license, as I think we have some folks from Creative Commons here, the most prominent licenses under which these things are released are Creative Commons licenses. And those promote free use and repurposing. If you can imagine being able to adapt something for a local use, for a use maybe in another country, with a different age group, with a different group of people who have different needs regarding access, perhaps those that are use screen readers, or people who may want something in a particular format. This just tells you that you're able to basically pull the content out of its container, adapt it, put it into the kind of container that you need it to be in. Kind of mind-blowing, really, in what these sorts of things are. So I hope that piques your curiosity in terms of the potential. So we think often of open educational resources as books. Sometimes they're print, sometimes they're digital. A few prominent examples are books that come out of the OpenStax project. This is a project out of Rice University in Texas. They create books with the most open of the Creative Commons licenses. They are free online, they're low cost in print, so around $40 or so. How many of you have heard of these before? Okay. Another place to look is the Open Textbook Library, and we're just talking about books right now, right? The Open Textbook Library has over 450 openly licensed books that are downloadable. If students don't have internet access at home, if somebody wants to download something to their phone and not have to read it online, this is a really great option. Many of the books have reviews, so you can see what other faculty members thought of them, if they thought they weren't worth reading, or if they thought, this is pretty good. There are other kinds of open educational resources. So the grants program that I run, this is one of our projects. One of our faculty, we have a school of veterinary medicine, and one of our faculty members said, I'd really like to have a series of videos that show our introductory students how to do a basic dog examination or a basic animal examination. So he and his colleague here are shown in a series of 4 videos that show vet students what they need to do to examine a small animal. A few other examples. At Virginia Tech in 2006, I was approached by a faculty member who said, the book I'm using is coming out in a new edition. It's $220. I have 700 students. They're not going to read the book anyway. Why would I, what can I do? I can't justify assigning this new book. And we worked together, and this was the first project that we did. It was very difficult, to be completely honest. But we remixed a book that had the Creative Commons license on it that allows editing. And we created a book that fits his course. It's available chapter by chapter as he wanted it. It's also available, the complete thing, in PDF. It's available in editable Microsoft Word, which is great while Word is in its current iteration. Has some longevity issues. But for now, we're really thrilled about this. So, yeah.
So he didn't write the book? He just kind of reorganized?
He took an existing book. He threw out probably 40 or 50% of the book, reorganized what was left, added things as needed, created a few additional sections and chapters. I updated all the data. We changed all of the pictures into things that are openly licensed. So it was quite involved. Yeah.
How did you go about locating an existing work that had a CC license?
This one was, I knew about some of the Intro to Business course or books, and we were able to look through probably 3 or 4 of them. I think I probably found this one in the Open Textbook Library, but I knew of a collection of books that had open licenses that were from the late 2000s. So yeah. Second book, this is a beta version of a book on electromagnetics that we published in January. So this is a draft that is being field tested, but is available in print, that we worked with a faculty member on, and this is all original content. He did hire some students with our grant money to create figures and to develop some of the graphics in the book, and we're really proud of it. So take a look, and I'm happy to talk with you more about that. But just some examples, and we do this in part because it's valuable for our students, and because we find it's valuable for other people. So these are downloads for the Fundamentals of Business book for January. This is mid-January. This is yesterday. So people are using this, and there is a tremendous impact that these kinds of resources can have. It's also important that they're high quality, that they're accurate, if you're going to have this kind of reach. Okay, so I've alluded to Creative Commons before. I want to tell you two different ways of defining what open educational resources are. So starting with Creative Commons licenses, or actually, I want to tell you two different ways, of thinking about open educational resources. Items in the public domain, items with these Creative Commons licenses. They allow someone to copy and to reuse these four with attribution. Some of them allow commercial use, some of them do not. And some of them require that the same license from the work, the original work, maybe that you modified, is put on the work that you create. So if you take something with this license that has the backwards, or the left circling arrow, you need to put that same license on your work. Same with this one. Another way of thinking about open educational resources and open content is called the 5 Rs. This comes from David Wiley, who is, I like to think of David as the godfather of open education, open educational resources anyway. He's been working in this field for a very long time. And his questions to us are, can anyone retain it? Can you keep it, or does it expire? Do you have to give it back? Can you keep it as long as you like? Can you reuse it? Is this something that you can use over and over again? Can you revise it or remix it? And then can you share it? Can you redistribute it? So if you're wondering, is something an open educational resource? These are two tests that you can use to answer that question. More specifically, with Creative Commons licenses, you'll see these 4 symbols used. The little person, who is it by? This tells you you always need to give credit, and Creative Commons licenses have a very specific way of giving credit. Some licenses will have a non-commercial icon. This says you can't make money off of it, but you can use it, you can remix it. The essay says the license that you used, or the license on the content that you used is the same license you need to apply. This one is new. You didn't see this one in the previous slide. This one says, I'm not really open. It says you can share me, but you can't make any changes. It's called no derivatives. So you can share copies of those kinds of things, but you can't make any changes. So from most open to least open, copyright being at the bottom, these licenses are applied on top of copyright. So the author is not giving away their copyright, they're just saying there are some rights that I'm allowing you to have in addition to the rights that you would have, fair use and otherwise, with copyright material. I will make sure you have a copy of these slides if you would like them, or a link to them if that's helpful. This chart shows us what some of the differences are between the licenses and the public domain marks as well as copyright in terms of whether or not you can adapt something, whether or not you can distribute something, if something requires attribution, and how fair use is affected, because fair use is not affected. And that's something those of you in the legal profession might be, that's something that is rather important is fair use. I have these crossed out here because we don't consider these to be open. They are free online, these two anyway, not always in copyright, but these two are free online. You can copy and share them, but you can't adapt them. So there's value, but maybe not quite as much value as we might want to see. First, any questions? Comments? Yeah.
You just said like you can use freely these resources, but you cannot adapt them.
Right.
What do you mean this like adaptation in which sense?
Okay, so if you wanted to, let's say you had a photo montage that had one of these licenses on it. You had a collection of photos in one piece, and you wanted to take two of them out because they weren't related to the point you were trying to make, and you wanted to add a few more in. You wanted to make changes or to adapt something. You would not be allowed to do that under the no derivatives. You might be allowed to do that under fair use, but this license says, you need to share as is. Does it help? Really good question. Okay, anything else? Other questions? Yeah.
So I don't want to get you astray, but, and I agree, like having as open as possible is a good goal.
Mm-hmm.
But when we, for example, work with faculty, we kind of define OERs much more broadly. For example, the library will pay to license ebooks or journals, and so they're free to students through that license. And so if the goal of OERs is to reduce costs of textbooks by using materials that are free to students, then I define that much more broadly
Okay.
than this. So what do you think?
So I would call that affordability, because textbooks that are produced by commercial vendors, be they ebooks, multi-user online versions, or anything else, they're usually still in copyright. And I think it's a good goal. The student affordability is a good goal, but I would be very careful in not calling that open, because it doesn't meet the 5 Rs. It doesn't fall under, it doesn't fall in this range. So my point here, and what I want to get into, is the philosophy behind open, and then look at what are the different ways it's applied. And I think this is a sort of a sister strategy, if you will, to open, but at times there are conflicts between affordability and open. But I'd love to come back to that a little bit later if you like. You had a comment or question?
And the bottom row for copyrighted works, you have a dash and a required to a yes or a no. Can you elaborate on
So scholarship and being a good scholar requires that we cite, right? That's good scholarly practice. Attribution is a practice that has to do with the terms of these licenses, and copyright does not say you have to attribute. You really should. Otherwise, someone will assume that you made it. It would be plagiarism if you did not. So there's a fine distinction between plagiarism and attribution, but excellent question also. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the potential of these licenses are. I'll let you read this. I'll talk about it. So this is one potential. What does this allow us to do as educators, as people, as people in society? What potential do these things have? And I'm going to prompt you in the next slide. I apologize for all of the red. As we engage in understanding licenses, figuring out how do we extract content, figuring out how to create in a format that other people, lots of different kinds of people, different maybe than us, can use, as we engage with attributing third-party works, we change, we learn. Our students can learn. If we're doing this, we are thinking, we are communicating, we're building, we're creating. If our students are doing this, we can use this as a tool for building their understanding of some of these areas, building student understanding of why it's not okay just to pull an image off of the web and use it however you want, right? Why it's not okay for us to do that. For a long time, I didn't know that you couldn't do that. But that's a copyright issue. These things force us into thinking about and maybe teaching about information ethics. They force us into thinking and working on our skills, our digital literacy skills, our information literacy, our technical literacy, our software skills. So this is sort of a doorway into which you can walk for your own skill development, your own knowledge development, as well as the development of students in these particular areas. Thoughts or questions about this? This is big. Yeah.
So for creating in a format others can use and learning from that, barriers other people may face, what practices do you guys use to make sure that you're creating accessible materials, both in a sort of legal standard, like things that meet ADA standards, but also in just a real world standard where your students, regardless of potential barriers, do you have specific accessibility policies around your open access materials?
So our materials that we've developed are intended to be accessible, screen reader accessible. You can't make something completely accessible because some of the accessibility needs conflict or compete with each other. But our goal is to make sure that, at least with documents, that they have a navigation structure that a screen reader can read, that they have alt tags. The alt tags are descriptions for images that tell you in words what you would hope somebody would see, a sighted person would see in that particular image. Honestly, I think that's what's important to me here is having that conversation and figuring out what barriers might somebody face and how can we be really proactive in reaching those. We had a lot of problems with this book because it was written in LaTeX and it was very difficult to apply standard tagging and auto tagging to it. We have since figured out how to do that, but that was not ready when we released in January. So we're happy we called this a beta because we had a lot of things to figure out. But I think this is a conversation that we have with our accessibility office. How can we do this? We have a new project. How can we do this? Do we need a transcript? Do we need captions? Do we need what do we need? What are we not thinking of? Who are we not thinking of for this material? Okay, so some potentials here. And then sort of what problems could this solve? And this gets to John's question about affordability. This gets to other kinds of things. Thoughts on what kind of problems? This presentation is designed to make you curious, okay? I hope it's working. Can you think of anything? And maybe this is just rhetorical if there's nothing that is coming to mind. Yeah.
I deal with a lot of students who, as part of sort of the exploration phase of research, are running into copyright issues, access issues with
Yeah.
their library loan,
Yeah.
things like that. And they don't necessarily want to make the investment of time and or resources to get access to all of these things that are hard to get to. So in some ways, I think open educational ideas, and certainly OERs, can solve that to some degree. They make everything much more accessible
To anyone.
to anyone. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So those of you who are maybe not from an educational institution or are from other places, have traveled other places in the world, or you're from other places, you could also tell us that, well, we don't have, you know, the full-blown EBSCO package, or we don't have access to this suite of journals, or in many places of the world, there are a lot of access issues to content that we take for granted here, or in our educational institutions. So, other thoughts, problems this could solve, and I know you also want to say, well, what problems does this create, right? And let's hold on to that till later. But yeah.
Well, in the sense of providing access, there's also perhaps a role for libraries in terms of the long-term preservation access. Take educational content as it is formatted today and transform it in such a way that it might be still usable in 10
Right,
years, 20
right.
years, all those, you know,
Right.
which it wasn't designed for today.
Yeah. So, for example, our book that is in Microsoft Word, making sure that's in a format that lasts for a long time. Very important. Okay. So, I want you to just kind of benchmark this question because I think it's a really important one to think about. So, that's a question for you to take home and to say, how could I apply this? What does this mean in my context? What does this mean in all the different projects that I do? All the different things that I work on. Okay, that was a thinking slide. Okay, so back to our outline. Let's talk about open pedagogy. A couple of you raised your hands when I said open pedagogy. And probably a year ago, I would have gone, what? What are you talking about? So a few examples that might be helpful. An example of open pedagogy is a non-disposable assignment. It's something that a student doesn't just say, okay, I wrote this paper, my professor saw it, I'm done. It's something that is larger than the trash can, okay? More people are going to see it besides the professor. What could this be? So some of these projects might include projects in which a student was to adapt or create something, or they're to modify with the intent of sharing. Blog posts that are public, Wikipedia editing, creation and remix of learning resources, creation and remix of almost anything. Open pedagogy emphasizes a different relationship between students and teachers in that students are the ones who are actively participating in their learning, and instructors are coaches, encouraging students to invest in their own learning. This might be a small part of a class. It might be a large part of a class. It depends on the maturity of the students. It depends on how you can implement this without them getting overwhelmed. The philosophy behind this comes from a Canadian philosopher, and I have a list of citations I'll share with you that cite him. He's a French Canadian, and some of the themes that this kind of teaching really wrestles with are the balance between autonomy and interdependence. You see this in the student-teacher redefinition of that relationship, freedom and responsibility. When I think of this, I think of the first time I joined the university as a faculty member, and just the tremendous freedom that I was given that I had never experienced in the private sector or in the government sector, in terms of being given a task and being told, you can do this however you like. Or not being given a task and say, go explore, go learn, go figure out what this program could look like. Giving students that same freedom, but the responsibility of it is really transformational. It's very transformational for me. And then democracy and participation. Who has access? Who can participate? This type of learning, open pedagogy, this kind of teaching, tends to promote student engagement. It's more motivational for students to be engaged in something that they are personally interested in. There are a lot of parallels with what we call deeper learning approaches, when students take a deeper learning approach. So there are a lot of benefits to this type of teaching, and there is value for the real world. So if you're having students do things like contribute something that they've created to Wikipedia, or to do creating an article to be published, or doing some kind of outreach in their community, that there's real value for the world and that the students are learning at the same time. I do have a list of citations. Happy to share the slides with you, but these are 4 articles, not very long, that have all been really helpful for me in understanding these concepts. I don't fully understand this. I'm not also in the classroom for 16 weeks every semester, but there's a lot of insight from these really bright and creative people, and I hope that you get a chance to read some of these. So I'd be happy to provide the slides to you and make sure that you either ask me or sign in, and I'll make sure that you get them. Yeah?
What was the name of the open access textbook library that you mentioned?
The Open Textbook Library. Yep. Yep. Okay, so a couple examples. As I mentioned earlier, David Wiley is sort of the godfather of open education, open educational resources. And he worked with a group of graduate students in 2012 at his university and took a book that was a project management book and asked them to adapt the book to be project management for instructional design. It was an instructional design class. Over several semesters, the students improved this book. Not all of their work was included in the book. Probably not all of their work should have been included in the book, right? But for the students whose work was excellent, their work was included, and they are a contributor to a book, which is a great thing to come out of school having your name on. Another example comes from a faculty member in New Hampshire who decided that she's really tired of having her students buy public domain materials for her American literature class. And so she got a group of students to compile a collection of public domain works that are legal to use however you wish, because they're in the public domain. They are that old. And created a book for and with her students. She has a lot to say about what that was like and what she learned and what her students learned. So lots of potentials here. I don't have a next slide that has lots of details about what I think the potentials are, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. But I'd be curious to know from you if you have thoughts.
It seems like for a lot of these student projects, it's giving a voice to people that have largely been voiceless, right? Students are just expected to learn, consume, rather than express his own point of view. So contributing.
Yeah, good.
One of the potential that I've seen faculty that I've worked with that have developed open educational resources or just repurpose their course using others' open educational resources, they have found student engagement has increased. And a lot of this is not just because of affordability, although that's part of it, but what's probably even more important is that the professor or instructor takes a new look at their course from an outcomes-based approach. Like what is important that the students learn, as opposed to just like, here's this textbook for economics 101, you know, how am I going to use the textbook to teach? So it creates a different mindset with professors, which in turn creates different mindset with the students too.
Right, right. So a professor is approaching a course with ideas of what they want students to get out of it, and then building the material that they ask students to interact with around those things, rather than building the course around the materials. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, yeah.
In legal education, I've got several projects going on in different institutions, and one in particular, which is the Center for Computer-Assisted Legal Instruction, in which students put together essentially decision tree models to help people who can't afford attorneys to walk through the process of gaining a particular license, or after getting a divorce, or filing some sort of claim. And what this teaches them is not just the area of law itself, which is what law school tends to be very siloed that way, but it also teaches them some basic computer programming skills, because what comes out of it is essentially not just a form, but more like an app that is sort of does basic interview questions. You know, is this true or is this true? And if this is true, then you ask this question over here. So it teaches them sort of basic computer programming skills, and also sort of the more real world stuff, which legal education frankly really falls down on, in terms of what is it like to conduct a client interview. It's kind of out of remove, because you're not necessarily walking through it with the client, but you're at least having that process of inquiry and thinking about engaging with other people. And then of course, once these things are vetted and they're out in the world, and they're used by some courts in some jurisdictions, and used by other institutions, they're actually doing real good out in the world. So it has that long tail that you were talking about before. But my real interest in it is how it sort of broadens them out from thinking about sort of the sole single theory of this particular area of law, and how it actually impacts and how it crosses over perhaps from property to family law, that kind of thing.
So you value the transferability of knowledge, the transferability of approach from one.
Transferability, but also the broadening of thinking. Taking it out of the purely academic exercise, taking it out of sort of the ivory tower mentality, where you can pluck a single idea out of a case and realize that the sort of the more organic messiness of the entire process.
So this kind of learning is very different than memorization. It is more applied. It's potentially more related to what students will be doing after they finish school, if somebody like a student is using this kind of approach. I really appreciate your insight. It's really interesting. So, other thoughts? Yeah.
Translation of works into other languages, which can vastly multiply the number of students needed.
Yeah. 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 Okay, so lots of applications. Yes.
I agree with everything that has been said before. There is a lot of potential, and to me, I think the focus on participatory learning is important. And so I come from Kyrgyzstan, which is a post-Soviet country, and so we are still struggling with, applying or developing student-centered approaches, opposing to a teacher-centered, which was inherited from Soviet texts. And also that is strengthened by our cultural background, which is in most cases is still already cultural with a lot of patriarchal traditions. So and I think by engaging students, so you really like expand, like you broaden like the vision for them, like what they do, the assignments that they create. It's not just for the sake of assignment, it can be used further. So there is a lot of potential that can help, like countries like Kyrgyzstan, to shift more to this
Yeah.
democratization of education.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
From Moldova and from continuing from the speech with my colleague from post-Soviet country, I want to say that in Moldova now you can to see in university a picture when the libraries is empty. Students don't want to go to listen real books in the libraries. And so for my opinion, this platform give a good possibilities for students to attract maybe in electronic form libraries books. This is a big problem, and we kind now the ways to attract students in library, and electronic form is one way to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. Oh, I do have a slide. I'll let you read that later because I told you I didn't. So I want to move on quickly because we're getting close to being out of time, and talk about sort of the philosophies that are behind, or the values that are behind these two types of practices. When I tried to consolidate my thinking about what open education is, I think it turned out to be very similar to what the description is that we read initially, that it's a movement, it's a philosophy, it's practices, it's tools, it's resources. And so I've adapted some work from a colleague in Washington State who has 6 different attributes of what open education is. So, and this might be a good time to compare what is open education versus what are some other approaches to both teaching and to publication. It's outward facing. If you write an article, it's for your audience. It's maybe not for your tenure packet. Maybe it is for your tenure packet, but it's more important for your audience to be able to read it. So this value may drive you to say, how can I self-archive my work? Can I publish in an open access journal? Can I if I edit a journal, can I flip my journal to be open access instead of something that's closed? One of the articles I cited earlier is in a journal that is a closed access journal. And I find it extremely frustrating because I would really like to share that article and say, here's the link, go get it. But I can't. I can share the link, but maybe you don't have a subscription. Maybe you don't have a really great interlibrary loan department. Maybe you can't get it. So outward facing, this being a value of how we act in the academy. Who needs access and how do we make sure they have it? Who needs what kind of access? How do we make sure they have it? It's inclusive. So we think about all kinds of barriers. We have our own barriers, and other people may have different barriers. What might the barriers be? How can we be intentional as we are thinking about publishing, we're thinking about teaching? Sometimes students who are asked to write a blog post don't want their real name out there. That's okay. You don't know what their history is. You want them to be safe. Maybe there's a restraining order against a X whatever. That's a barrier. So those are important barriers to acknowledge if you're engaging in these kinds of practices. It's not just the need for screen readers or other kinds of traditional accessibility things that we may think of, but other kinds of barriers to keep people safe and keep them really in control of their environment. We engage with open licenses and try to push ourselves to be as free as possible, try to push ourselves to be as open as possible. Try to say, okay, so I'm not going to make any money off of this thing, but if somebody else can build a really great, can modify it and make something really great out of it, go for it. Maybe somebody can make something I hadn't thought of before. Feedback and collaboration. Part of working, teaching, writing in the open, both is giving feedback and receiving feedback. Sometimes feedback hurts, but feedback is really important because it helps us know, it helps us understand what kind of quality we're producing. It helps us understand what kind of value we're producing. And collaboration. Collaboration is really valuable. It's hard to create something all by yourself. Sometimes it's easy, but maybe there's more value when you work together. Implementing and incorporating new ideas, both about teaching, about research, about other kinds of things. Some of you in coming in here I've been able to talk with and have told me a little bit about the kinds of pedagogies you're looking at that I've never heard of. I want to know more. So incorporating new ideas and seeing, well, does this work? Is there a research base for it? Does it work in my classroom? What does it do? How does it work? Giving credit. So this is how you would credit the author, the creator of this image, the copyright symbol, the name of the work with a link to the work, the name of the author, and the name of the license. This tells everybody I didn't make this. It was made by Luis Barrado, and it has this license on it. And if you want to see the actual thing, you can click here and see and get that same picture. This gives credit to Luis, and it also tells someone I didn't create this myself. And finally, I think these practices can be used as a lever for a lot of different things in our society, in the university. And I'm excited to see in all of your different contexts how you end up using this information and this thinking about these approaches. So I want to challenge you to figure out what you can do to make what you do more open, what you can do to make it more valuable for others, how you can explore and wrestle with some of these values and maybe implement some of them. This is a lot to wrap your mind around in terms of an approach, but I think I found it to be very gratifying and really exciting in terms of something that I can give to other people and say, I think there's something in here that's really exciting. I think there's something in here that's really effective and that can change your practice and can make what you do more helpful to other people and even more valuable and interesting to yourself. So find out what's in your bag and figure out how you can share it. So thank you. And happy to talk further and just want to make sure before you go to pick one of these up. So I think we have not very much time. Yeah, great. In the back. Oh, you want to see the slide I didn't show you? Okay. Yeah, sure. Sorry to make you dizzy. Okay. So this was what is the potential for open pedagogy? This is not comprehensive. And part of the reason I didn't show this to you is because I told you I wasn't there, and then I realized, yes, I had made this slide. And also because I think there's a lot more that could be added to this than I have thought of. So, yeah.
You mentioned open access journals,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering if any of them were peer reviewed?
Yes, yes. So peer review is not contingent on open access or vice versa.
Right, that's why I wondered if they were, because I could see it going either way.
Yeah. There are some.
But not all.
Yeah, not all. There's a site called Think, Check, Submit. That's sort of a 3-step way of evaluating a publication opportunity, and it asks authors to think through, where is this? What are the ethics behind this journal? Is it a valuable thing? It's essentially a response to some of the predatory publishing that we see. Think, check, submit.
And there's the directory of open access journals, and to be on there, I don't think it has to be peer reviewed, but one requirement is that the journal must state what their policies are.
Yeah,
if I'm
they
not mistaken.
they have there's several not societies but groups that you can belong to, but you must adhere to the ethical standards of publication for those particular groups, and those are good markers of journals that have a good practice. Think, Check, Submit has links to all of those different ethical bodies. Yeah, sorry, I thought no. Yeah.
So at one point in your presentation, I think it was at the end of the OER part, you kind of briefly alluded to what might be potential downsides to this.
Okay.
You kind of briefly said that. So does anything come to your mind? Like, are there downsides to open education?
I think that what the objections that I usually hear are, well, what about somebody who takes my work and does something with it that I don't like? And my response to that is to say, it could happen. You also could stub your toe on the sidewalk or miss the bus. Like, there are risks in life. And there are rogue actors. So we do what we can to deal with rogue actors. There are some, I've heard of stories where some of the OpenStax books are being sold at a huge cost. Somebody's making money off of them. They can, but buyer beware, check to see if you can get this material for the price at which it was, at the lower price it was intended to be sold at. There are some instances where vanity publishers have compiled Creative Commons licensed things and republished them. Well, it gets your work out there. Is that bad? There are some instances where someone has said, okay, we're embracing a Creative Commons licensed practice, and then they change their mind. You can't take the licenses off. It's like feathers in a pillow. It's out there. You can't get all of them back, right? So it depends on what your motivation is. It depends on how risk averse you are. I think I wouldn't advocate for sharing national security data with a Creative Commons license. There's some things that should be secret for a time based on what they are. So, yeah, we're at American University. What do you think? You all work with security kinds of things. Just a second.
I was going to take a slightly different direction with it and just say, there's a certain amount of privilege to being able to publish your work for free, right? And creating a culture where information is free. So if you're in a secure position where you receive a salary for the work you do, you don't have to worry about making ends meet through somebody paying you for your intellectual property.
Yeah.
But if we create a culture wherein people develop an expectation that information is going to be free, and you're not attached to a salaried institution, and you do rely on somebody buying your work for you to make ends meet, right? So certain creative works where folks aren't receiving a salary to do what they do, if we create this major cultural shift wherein consumers of information totally expect that the information they want can and should be free, we've created a big economic shift that could put people who don't have the privilege of a full-time salaried faculty position at risk, at economic risk.
I think there's, I think, that's a reality. And I don't have an answer.
No, and I'm not saying that that's a reason to never ever publish open access, but it's a thing to think about and to recognize that if you can put your material out there for free. I mean, you talk about real world applications, so students, you're using student labor to produce intellectual property, and they're paying for the privilege to get that exposure.
Yeah, I think.
But then they're going to graduate and want to be paid for that same level of work. Where is their salary going to come from?
Yeah,
Who's going
I
to
think
pay for
there is definitely an ethical dilemma in including students in this, that it
Balance.
needs to be voluntary, because I don't ever want to say that student labor should be used to create things against student wishes. That's not appropriate. But I think you raise a valuable point of if we're in a society where some people are embracing these practices because they can and some people are not because they can't, what kind of disadvantage does that put them at? So how do we spread the advantages to others? I guess, doing what we can do. Yeah.
I think another potential downside, although I'm very much in favor of open education, open educational resources, but another potential downside is a loss of quality. For example, textbook publishers get a lot of bad press for high prices, but the truth is, the textbooks they produce are of very high quality, and usually, not all. You can't say all for anything, but generally of high quality with a lot of extra materials like ancillary websites, blah blah blah. I'm not saying that an open textbook can't be of high quality. There are many that are, but there's a potential for that, of a loss of quality. So that's one thing that concerns me.
Yeah. So I think looking at those kinds of resources, why are they being created? Is this a pedagogical experience? Is this an output experience? And then getting savvy about, and I think this is a role for libraries, getting savvy about what makes for a good publication. Good questions. You had something you wanted to add.
I have a sales pitch
Oh,
for
okay.
EU people in the room who want to share their work. Just to say that the library, for those who don't know, has a repository, the Digital Research Archive at dra.american.edu, which has a field for the license under which that work is distributed.
Good.
You can put in their CC.
Good. And that actually, we have something very similar at Virginia Tech. That's where the Fundamentals of Business book lives. And so those are good places to put the more static kinds of resources as a very stable place where they can live. So, yes.
Just to add to this library participation, I can also see like OER and open pedagogy really helps develop collaboration across institutions. Special librarians and faculty. I think that's a lot of potential to collaborate, to share like what each sides know. That's just to create deep institutional educational practice.
Thank you.
Yes, it's now a big issue for our libraries, which was like a separate, and especially in my university, it's small university in south part of Moldova. The director of library now found any ways to be more open for the world, because when at a small university and area is little bit close, it's difficult to enrich the arsenal of library, to attract the students in the library. So now the library in Moldova have a big, large list of the question how develop the library, progressive development in, like I said, in more useful and successful way. And this is like one chance for them. So I will transmit this information.
Yeah.
To the
Yeah.
director.
Good. Okay. All right. Two more comments, questions. You want to go first?
I just had a quick follow-up to, I think that's a really good point about there's a certain amount of privilege to being able to give your work away for free. But to, I think what Anita was saying earlier about like this is a movement that is growing, like there are a number of grant giving institutions that are still paying authors to produce works that are openly licensed, and they're just getting paid up front via this grant money versus on the back end from commercial publisher royalties. So I guess you could argue that their potential earning is less, but I don't know how many textbook authors are getting rich off of that.
A few.
Yeah.
I know a few.
Yeah. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
Just one really quick question. The two textbooks that
Yes,
you
yes.
showed, what did you create those in?
Okay. The print versions or the electronic versions? Or
Did you
okay.
use different platforms?
We did. They're both available in PDF. They're both available print on demand. We use two different vendors for the print on demand. I learned a lot about parts of a book, about parts of a cover, about front matter, about formatting. The first book was authored in Microsoft Word, converted to PDF, and sent, divided into chapters, posted. And then the whole PDF we published through Lulu Press, which is a print-on-demand vendor. The color version was a lot more expensive than I want it to be, but the author really wanted print-on-demand available. The second book was written in LaTeX, which is a mathematical notation language that is very helpful for equations, and there are a lot of equations in the book. So we said, yes, this is your native language. Please write in it. We will support you, and we'll figure out how to do this. That book is only available in PDF. We will release, when that version is updated in the summer, we'll release the LaTeX code. So the idea behind that project is, and this is a faculty-led project, the faculty members' idea is to create a body of work that can be pulled from using a remix system. So there are 3 different ways of teaching electromagnetics. It depends on what your preference is and order of things. If you like to use certain kinds of charts and graphs in your work, and so being able to pull from that system to create what you want in the order in which you want to create it. So if you look in the book, there are module numbers, little tiny numbers before each of the sections in the chapters, and those are discrete pieces that can be moved. They can also be edited within. So we very much struggled with print on demand from LaTeX to PDF because our files kept getting rejected from the printer. So we have figured out, we have a script now that cleanly allows us to have those not add all kinds of strange figures here and there. And that one went through Amazon CreateSpace. We are working with, we would like to also work with Ingram, Spark, Ingram Press, to do a print-on-demand version, but the timeline was too long for when we needed a version that students could purchase from a point-of-sale vendor for them. So that's why we ended up going with CreateSpace. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this has given you some curious things to be curious about, and it's really nice to meet all of you. So thank you.